Well, hello everyone. Salamatsizbi, здравствуйте. So on behalf of the British-Kazakh Society, it's a real pleasure to welcome you all today to this webinar, which is titled Kazakhstan, the Road to Carbon Neutrality. So logistically, the webinar will be recorded and available on the website. There is a simultaneous live translation into Russian, so please choose the language on the button at the bottom of your screen, Russian or English. In addition, you're encouraged to ask the panel using the Q&A function on your screen. So today we're absolutely delighted to have Aida Sitdikova and a great panel with us. So Aida is the Director of Energy, Eurasia, Middle East and Africa with the Sustainable Infrastructure Group at the EBRD in London. As such, she is a leading policy engagement with respective to government to assist in national regulation in areas as renewables and cost-reflective tariffs. She holds an MBA in International Finance from the Thunderbird School of Global Management in Arizona. Over to you, Aida.
Thank you, David, and welcome to all. The climate discussion is picking up speed. From the times of the Paris Agreement adoption to the famous IPCC report flagging the climate emergency, to the sudden realization that COVID might not be the humankind's biggest challenge, but climate change is, to the real acceleration of events, technologies, and what we observe as tectonic shifts across a number of sectors, markets, and countries, things are moving faster on a bigger scale and involving multiple stakeholders. The latest report on Zero Carbon Roadmap by the International Energy Agency gives very stark messages on what needs to be done to reach carbon neutrality by mid-century and avoid the temperature rise above the irreversible levels. As Kazakhstan celebrates its 30th anniversary of independence this year, the country, traditionally dominated by coal, oil, and gas throughout its economy, and actually throughout the years of independence, has also been implementing its commitments under the Paris Agreement, spearheading renewables in the region of, we proudly, EBRD, financed close to 800 megawatt of 1.7 gigawatt currently built. And of course, President Tokayev making the announcement of Kazakhstan's carbon neutrality target by 2060. And just recently, he increased the planned renewables target from 10% to 15% by 2030. So great to have this distinguished panel with us today to focus on Kazakhstan's trajectory to climate neutrality by 2060. The panel has representatives from key stakeholders, and I'm grateful for accommodating the London time. I know it's a very early morning in California and late evening in Nur Sultan. I'm delighted to have with us then Mr. Sungat Yessimkhanov, Chairman of Samruk Energy, the national power utility. I know Sungat from his time as Deputy Minister of Energy, a direct champion of Kazakh Renewables. From big corporates to the government, we have with us Abay Kulanbay, Head of Renewables at the Ministry of Energy, who I look forward to talking to not just on renewables, but what on Kazakhstan's plans are to reach peak emissions in this decade already. A big part of Kazakhstan's history is linked to oil and gas. I am therefore pleased to have with us Julie Mulkerin Ortiz, General Manager for Energy Transition Strategy and Planning at Chevron, to share how her sector and company is preparing itself for a low carbon future. And last but definitely not the least, Mr. Nurlan Kapenov, Chairman of the Kazakh Solar Association, the pioneer of Kazakh Renewables, the person with whom we financed our first solars back in 2014-15. An unrivaled renewables expert and developer who has really contributed to the success of renewables in the country. So I will give the floor to each speaker for 3, maximum 4 minutes to introduce their organizations and decarbonization efforts. Alijan and I will be watching the time rigorously as we only have 1 hour and lots to cover. And then we will move to the interactive discussion. Without further ado, dear Sungat, the floor is yours.
Thank you, colleagues. I'm very, very happy to see you all. Well, I know that we have met earlier. Thank you very much for your kind introduction, but I will disagree that I'm the champion. I think we're not the champions, we're the officials. Champions are out there sitting like Nurlan, Kapenov, or Abay, Kulanbay, who was a young guy back then when he began drafting the laws on renewables, and the EBRD, who financed the first project, the pioneer project in the renewables, who pushed us towards some project, actually that we didn't believe in some of the projects, but they still made it happen. And we remember the meetings in Abu Dhabi. Mr. Bazumbayev was there. You remember we had this discussion on the 1,000 megawatt. We didn't believe then, but now we're the believers. So now when you say that carbon neutrality by 2060, that the head of state has declared, it might seem doubtful, it might seem unattainable and unachievable, but the world is developing very fast. And maybe in 5 years' time, we will even be rectifying these objectives, these goals too. The renewables of 10%, actually, they looked fantastic, but now they became realistic. Well, I have been the chair of Samruk for just 1 month, slightly over a month, so that's why I will be very, very general. Well, let me introduce the company itself. Samruk is one of the largest energy holdings of the company. 30% of electricity is manufactured or generated in our utilities. Yes, they mostly are coal-driven, coal-fired, and of course we have the legacy and the large-scale coal-fired utilities. They do have some polluting impact, but we're trying to stay up to date. Just recently we had an environmental forum and we've discussed with colleagues this issue. On one hand, we're kind of handling the energy transition. We want to go for cleaner fuel, but it's a quasi-state company. Should we interfere? Do we have to interfere with the private market? However, maybe the private sector should decide it itself. However, we do have the capacity and potential. The large-scale hydropower plants will keep using and firing coal. However, we do have the objective of reducing the pollution, reducing the emissions. And I knew that there are some new technical solutions such as the filters and so on, but I think we can come up with some solutions to support the transition. For instance, to gas of Almaty CHPPs. We have recently discussed with Mr. Rahimov, we have the 4th level of energy transit, we have wind and solar, and further gas is the 3rd level of transition. But at least that is a step forward, because that helps us improve the environment. In the wind energy, we do have several projects that are under discussion, and I can't talk about that, but there is a readiness, there's preparedness to move on, to work with the partners, to look at the new projects. We do have some kind of initial and first proposals to that end, but we'll have to analyze this deeply. Since we're working under the Samruk Foundation and with colleagues from Kazakh, we do understand, but with the maneuvering, with regulation, these issues cannot be solved so easily. So I think we will be moving in the regulation area to create opportunities to let private companies help with the work. I mean, help them actually. So, and another thing is the social work. Of course, the mining. We own one of the biggest coal mine of the country, and it's not only about shifting from coal to gas, but what are we going to do with the coal? Like, we have enough reserves to cover 300 years, and we're not going to use it. We're going to abandon it. So what are we going to do with the coal? Actually, it's a very ashy coal, 30–40%. Can we gasify it? Can we enrich it? Can we beneficiate it? There are lots of challenges, lots of issues. Yes, we're working on it. We have some coal beneficiation project. We're discussing it with our partners. We will be working on this. As a state company, we do understand our responsibilities, our duties, and actually responsibility before the future generations. And we're ready to learn from the others, to talk to the others. I think I made it on time, haven't I? Thank you.
perfect. You're spot on, both with messages and with timing. On this note, maybe the floor over to Abay, please. Abay, if you could give us a quick scoop where the ministry is currently as a government official.
Добрый день, уважаемые участники.
Good day, dear participants. Good morning, good evening. On behalf of the Ministry of Energy of Kazakhstan, and for me personally, I would like to welcome you all. The climate agenda becomes one of the most important, one of the priority challenges for the energy sector all over the world. And it's a threat and a challenge for the humanity. Actually, the raw sector, raw material sector of the economy are going through significant transformation. The ambitious and hairy audacious goals that are being passed in all the countries on decarbonization and achieving carbon neutrality will have a very significant impact on overall fuel sector of the country, and energy sector of many countries. And at that background, the Ministry of Energy, together with the other global leaders, pay significant attention to renewables and alternative sources of energy. Our country was the first country in Central Asia who has created the legal framework for renewables and alternative sources of energy, including the law on support to renewables, the green economy concept, some target indicators that were passed until 2050. Well, actually, I would like to mention here that the first indicator of 2020 in the amount of 3% has been achieved. Together with that, there was a discussion with the president, a kind of meeting with the president on development of energy sector. We have received instruction to develop this sector and reach the level of renewables up to 50% by 2030. We have introduced we were the first in the Central Asian to introduce the specialized tariffs for renewables. We have created and established one buyer of the electricity, and also we have introduced the auction trades for electricity for renewables. At the moment, the country is implementing decarbonization policies, and in order to stimulate the environmentally clean and friendly energies, the new law is being drafted on alternative energy sector or alternative energy sources. Also, I would like to mention that we're the only country in the region which has the opportunity and a chance of developing both solar and wind and hydropower. For instance, the capacity of wind power is 10 times higher than the projected capacity of the country. And in this context, we are working on development of large-scale renewable power plants. When it comes to export of this actually renewable power, we will be looking at that as well, and we think that actually the renewables could be a separate element of the
технологий. В целом, спасибо за внимание.
Thank you very much, Abay. I mean, this is quite a comprehensive scoop of what the ministry is planning in terms of decarbonization implementation by 2060. I'm very pleased to give the floor to Julie. I just want to say there's some she can understand, I think, the Russian channel. Maybe we can have to look at the Russian channel so she gets the English interpretation as well. But Julie, over to you. It's in English, please don't worry, and I will be trying to help with any issues on the translation side. Over to Julie. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you everyone for asking us to join today and for calling in. I'm very happy to be part of this panel, as our presence in Kazakhstan is one of the most important locations we have as Chevron. Chevron, for those that may not know, is an international oil and gas company with headquarters in California, where I'm based now. We've been working on energy transition topics for a number of years at the company, and recently released a summary report where you can find more information, titled Higher Returns and Lower Carbon, which is a summary of the path forward for Chevron. We describe in the report and believe that oil and gas is an important part of the energy future, And as part of that energy future, we need to work on making the oil and gas production as efficient as possible. We've set targets and metrics that are outlined in the report in more detail, but where we're targeting 24 kilograms of carbon dioxide equivalent for each barrel equivalent of oil or gas produced. We outline our actions in 3 areas that, if you think about them in a time horizon, go from what we are working on now to the future, and align well with what the IEA and the net zero emission scenario state that oil and gas companies should be doing to help promote the energy transition. In our first action area, we talk about lowering carbon intensity cost efficiently of our oil and gas operations, of which the metrics for our oil and gas production are an important part, as well as targets on methane and a commitment to zero routine flaring by 2030. Our second action area talks about increasing renewables and offsets in support of our business. How do we find areas that are economic and competitive now to help bridge into the future of our third action area, investing in low carbon technologies to enable commercial solutions, such as technologies like carbon capture, utilization and storage, novel energy production, as well as hydrogen. To each of these action areas, we've laid out our capital commitments and believe as well that there are important supporting mechanisms to help enable this transition. The first one is transparency. We talk a lot about and believe that transparency is important to show the performance of the oil and gas production, and believe that carbon footprinting has a role in the future to try and show on an equivalent basis the carbon content of value chains. We're working with a number of partner organizations to scale carbon footprinting activities, as well as carbon footprint mini products in our portfolio. In addition to transparently reporting the emissions of our products, which are both through some of the novel efforts and leaning forward, like on carbon footprinting, we also disclose the greenhouse gases for each segment of our business in clear metrics tables that have historical performance and are broken down by segment and by gas. In addition to transparently reporting, the last topic that I'll mention that goes well with the panel today is really support from policymakers to help enable the transition. We've supported for more than a decade a price on carbon and supported market-based mechanisms to help enable the transition. We believe that carbon pricing should form the main element of climate policy, but also recognize that the roles of targeted policy and support for innovation are important to help bring forward the technologies that are still emerging. With this, I look forward to the discussion period and talking more about how Chevron can contribute to the energy future.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Julie. Lots of exciting subjects that you touched on. One of them is, of course, renewables. So I'm delighted to give the floor to Nurlan Kapenov, chairman of the Kazakhstan Solar Association, for his intro, please.
Greetings to all the participants. As Aida has mentioned, yes, I represent here the Kazakhstan Association of Solar Energy. We position ourselves as a uniform platform, kind of platform for all the renewable players in Kazakhstan. We also kind of see ourselves as the practicing experts. Most of our team members are the people who already had projects in Kazakhstan, who have implemented some projects, who we've been working for more than 10 years. We deal with all the issues related to renewables development in Kazakhstan. First and foremost, that is improvement of investment for indirect investment environment for indirect investment. We raise issues related to simplification, improvement of legislation there too. Also, we provide support to investors who are willing to bring their money into this sector. We kind of provide some case management. We explain them the risks. We explain the potential problems and challenges. We help them overcome some of the difficulties as well. On top of that, we publish a magazine, in paper, an electronic one as well, a journal and a magazine. It was called the Kazakh Solar, but at the last version, we have decided to rename it, and we will be doing the rebranding of the magazine. It is called Kazakh Green, and we will be covering not only the solar and renewables, but actually all the aspects of green economy, and not only in Kazakhstan, but for all the countries of Central Asia. In 2019, we have successfully conducted our grand event, the Solar Fest Kazakhstan, that was attended by participants from all over the globe, even more than we expected. It turned out to be a very good and open platform where we have discussed a number of issues, and the outcome was actually a charter to the government, an address or declaration. There were 6 items, actually 4 have already been addressed fully, 2 are being addressed or have been addressed partially, have been solved partially. What else? As for renewables development in Kazakhstan, as many say in Kazakhstan, actually, that the renewables is detrimental to the energy system, as a whole. However, we believe that renewables have revealed the existing problem that have been accumulated for the last decade. I mean, for the last 20, 30 years, the renewables have simply revealed, demonstrated the shortcomings or the poor condition that the system has at the moment. However, I hope that some important steps will be undertaken after the recent meeting with the head of state, presided by the President Tokayev. And as always, I will be hopeful. I mean, I hope that jointly we will succeed.
Thank you so much, Nurlan. And without further ado, maybe we'll kick off our sort of Q&A discussion and interactive conversation. My first question would be to Mr. Yessimkhanov, Sungat. Samruk Energo coming with a big legacy of coal assets, but there's also, on the other hand, this pressure to achieve carbon neutrality by 2060. Could you please maybe tell us a few words about the immediate steps, immediate plans? You mentioned Almaty CHP conversion from coal to gas. So maybe you could give us a scoop on what the timing is, what sort of format you're contemplating. You made a very good point on renewables being best placed in the hands of private investors, which frankly makes all sense. So we probably wouldn't dwell on that, but what about this coal to gas conversion that you also mentioned? And related to that question, my second question is, does Samruk Energo have plans to implement training or retraining programs for its employees, given this push for decarbonization? Do you expect more demand for greener jobs? And will there be anything done at Samruk Energo? Thank you.
Thank you, Aida, for your question. Well, let me just give a small feedback or comment to what Nurlan has said. Yes, I generally agree that we did participate in renewables development together, but I agree that it is a problem. It's not that the renewables is a problem, but renewables have revealed certain problem that the energy sector, energy system has. However, there are some nuances. Maybe it has to do with my, professional deformation, because I'm from anti-monopoly background. When we talk about sustainable development, we kind of focus on environment, and however, there are social and economic aspects too to be considered. And we must admit, considering our developing economy status, there are some nuances which prevent us from which prevented us from rapidly introducing renewables to the system, similar to European countries. So my comment to that end, and that yes, the state is working on that, is paying attention. But now you see the objectives, now you see the goals, like reach carbon neutrality by 2060. So I think that with small steps are growing more and more confident, and I think that step by step we will be moving more steadily. However, I believe that there are colleagues listening to me. That's why I wanted to clarify this position. Well, as for participation, yes, clearly we are not going to do anything with the large-scale hydropower plants, and we'll keep them. But we still have 39 years until the zero net carbon neutrality. So I'm sure that hydropower plants will be depreciated, and maybe technologies will develop, and we will then have an understanding of what could be done with them to improve them. As for the Almaty CHPPs, yes, we do have the objective of moving to gas. Actually, we're working on that. Thank you very much for your support. Your recommendations to the ministry, to my colleagues, are being considered. There are some deadlines. Yes. I can say them deadlines actually. As of 2026, the CHPP2 need to be gas-fired completely, 100%. So we're looking at some feasibility study. We don't know whether we're going to build a new plant or we're going to have a kind of gradual shift and transition. Well, Samruk colleagues in charge of that actually went even further than that. And there is another CHPP in Almaty, the CHPP3 and we're looking at that. Actually, it wasn't proposed as an initial plan, but we will also be making feasibility study, and we will see whether this utility from firing coal may be shifted to firing gas. That's one. So second, when it comes to renewables development, it needs to be flexible, needs to be maneuver. We need to have some maneuvering capacity, and mostly to help the load for Almaty node. So the work is being done. There is intense and very lots of work. We are not moving backwards. There will be no going back, and I'm sure that we will be talking to you, advising. And as for general renewables, yes, we do have some projects, and Abay will confirm. I have a couple of numbers. Out of all the renewables manufactured in Kazakhstan, apparently 11% was manufactured by Samruk Energy utilities. We also have two large-scale hydropower plants. The one has already been modernized. There's a new one that also contribute to that, volume of renewables generated in Kazakhstan. So we will continue. And as a 30%, of course, we are as a consumer. Significantly help the Republican Financial Settlement Center. However, there are two more projects that we're implementing. The two wind plants that will be finalized next year, 110 megawatt. So as a result, we'll have two large-scale wind plants. The one has a capacity of growing on the Chile corridor. So should there be some serious demand capable to offer some batteries or kind of battery-added solutions, we will look at that. As for the training, yes, the professions are changing very, very quickly. But frankly, Samruk Energy doesn't have an objective of retraining its staff that currently operates and works in coal mines or other places. That's not an objective for a year or so. But we do understand generally that if this market develops and evolves, we will have to prepare some stuff. Our colleagues work very closely with the University of Energies, for instance, and they are members of the Board of Trustees, and they all are alumni of those universities. So I'm sure that in the future we'll make sure that the higher education is adapted or kind of shaped by the needs of this future green economy. Actually, we think that we also need to develop the specialists of our existing enterprises to let them train the new technology, understand and learn the new technologies, and try to reduce the emissions from the existing coal-fired utilities. However, when it comes to renewables, I think that will be part of the state and the national policy, and we will just be contributing our share. That's it briefly. Well, maybe it wasn't as short as
very concise and impactful and clear, I think. And it's obvious that coal is a big, I don't want to say an elephant in the room, but it is a big, it's a legacy in Kazakhstan. It will have to be tackled one way or the other. And well, I can only applaud Samruk Energy's activities so far. And of course, there's more to be done. And all the best with the Almaty CHP coal to gas conversion. On a much sort of broader scale, a question to Abay on what would be the feasible decarbonization pathway, Abay, for the country to achieve the 2060 target. what do you see is the key factors that can allow us to reduce emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, already in this decade? And of course, we know about Kazakhstan participation in the Paris Agreement and implementing its commitment there. But what about actual steps on the road to 2060, ideally in this decade already? Thank you.
Our country is regrettably at the moment is among the top 30 of the greatest GHG pollutants, and it's the 11th when it comes to energy sector presence in GDP. To that end, we have passed a roadmap to come up with some response measures, and under that roadmap, the next decade will lead to reduction of emissions in such sectors as energy by 40%, agriculture by 25%, coal industries 8%, and transportation sector by 2%. In order to implement this roadmap, we will develop the energy efficiency in all the sectors. Energy efficiency will be key and of paramount significance. Secondly, we will be developing the renewables. At the moment, the generation of 4.1 gigawatt come from the renewables. In the upcoming 10 years, upcoming decades, we will increase this capacity up to 10 gigawatts. On top of that, in the next decade, and I mean, best case scenario, or we want to be the leader in production of green hydrogen. And actually, maybe for that purpose, some additional share of renewables will be increased by 10 gigawatts, including autonomous, large-scale utilities who will produce green hydrogen exclusively and who will develop blockchain industries in an autonomous manner. Earlier, I mentioned that we will develop the renewable generation for the export purposes. And under that objective, maybe by 2030, and if all the best case scenarios come true, then 30 gigawatts will come from renewable sources of energy, not the traditional ones. And also, we will integrate all of our projects. I mean, was Mr. Sungat has mentioned, whether we want it or not, we will have to have the transition of all of our coal-fired utilities to new technologies, such as clean coal technologies or compressed coal technologies, with the modern incineration of furnaces, modern furnaces, and filtering, and so on. However, similar to other countries' examples, we will be shutting down our coal-fired utilities, whether we want it or not. Also, I would like to quote here the professor of Chinese University, Xinhua, that they presume that by 2050, not only ourselves, but actually the whole country, all of the world, the whole world will produce or will manufacture in a carbon neutral way. And that way, as a country, having our vast territory, having high resources of for renewables and for nuclear power, we want to be the leader of that.
Thank you, Abay. It's extremely interesting what you just mentioned, especially on creating hydrogen economy in Kazakhstan and ramping up renewables by 10 gigawatts additionally, just as a source of this green hydrogen, which of course would be a carbon-free energy carrier. But one question I didn't ask is about the carbon pricing. So we are seeing, and Julie mentioned that, carbon has a price. Do you see any sort of market instruments or any regulatory setup that would enable basically to determine the price of carbon in Kazakhstan?
Well, first and foremost, I would like to say that following this big conference with the head of state, this year, until the end of the year, the national system of quota trade and national distribution of quotas by local enterprises will be revised in a radical manner. Also, the Ministry of Environment is looking on establishment of carbon fund, so sort of a carbon transition fund. There is a GIZ, I think, German company that's providing some advice and consultations, and we will be working with them on this. And provided everything is success, everything is good, we will develop all of that. So not only the European countries will be introducing the carbon tax, and the other heavy industrialized countries such as US and China will be introducing them. And given that we are one of the exporting countries, we will probably have to and actually want to introduce the internal carbon tax, so that we could avoid, losing the money, but to collect the money locally. And this carbon fund will accumulate all this money, and with this money, including some assistance from international financial institutions, we will be developing the sector internally. Well, when it comes to exact numbers, then we're still discussing this with international consultants. However, provided that everything is okay, we will be able to share the data.
And I see already questions on the carbon border adjustment mechanism coming. But we are moving on to Julie. And Julie, the question to you is, what is the role of gas? So oil might be sort of one thing, but what is the role of gas that you at Chevron see as a low carbon alternative to coal in the Kazakh context? And how this transitional fuel would be enabling potentially renewables in the country? And my second question is, how is the sector overall getting ready for the low carbon future? Is there anything that you at Chevron plan for activities in Kazakhstan specifically? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. So on the question of gas's role in the energy future, as you mentioned, gas can provide an important alternative and also complement to the fuel mix. On a life cycle basis, gas has usually about 1/2 the total carbon emissions as coal generation, and can also provide a complement to renewables for intermittent power generation. So when renewables are not available, gas can help fill the gap in power needs. But bridging to the next question, one of the important things with gas as well as oil production is to manage the methane emissions associated with the gas production. So one of the targets I mentioned that our company has is a target on methane emissions converted to a carbon dioxide equivalent basis for our oil and gas production, as well as a global methane detection campaign. Right now, we're piloting, including in Kazakhstan, satellite technologies to assess areas of potential methane, to see if there's methane fugitives or leaks that are unintended releases to enable addressing those activities. It's part of a larger campaign that many may be familiar with that's called Marginal Abatement Cost Curve Process. Chevron didn't invent the process. It's been around and used by governments and other companies for a number of years. But what it helps a company or industry, economy do is compare the alternatives for reductions on the same basis. At Chevron, we have implemented this across the portfolio. And for those that are not familiar with a marginal abatement cost curve, it's a supply stack or alternative of the reduction opportunities presented on the same basis, where it shows the amount of reduction opportunity available at a break-even carbon price or on a discounted cash flow basis or value creation basis. What we do at Chevron is we have each business unit, including our operations in Kazakhstan, submit ideas for reduction projects where we can use portfolio theory to select across those opportunity suites from things like energy efficiency, which may do things like cogeneration of heat and power in some of the new facilities, looking at improving reliability of the operations, for example, and be able to compare them to other options, like evaluating reductions in flaring practices, and also looking at renewable power generation as a complement of imported power or power to produce the oil and gas. Additionally, as it's been mentioned, and I see in some of the chat questions, it also can help enable and compare carbon capture utilization as a portion or a way to complement oil and gas production and implement it as part of a project. So this process for Chevron is a corporate-wide process that really helps make sure that we're evaluating the different opportunities on a similar basis to help enable, going back to my first statement of higher returns and lower carbon, that our production is as competitive as possible to prepare for things like border carbon adjustment and increased interest in the performance of oil and gas assets.
Thank you, Julia. I mean, really interesting stuff that you're mentioning on. Well, of course, methane is a sort of major issue of the current time, and being much more potent than CO2. It's great to hear that this is addressed on a corporate basis at Chevron, but also probably more strategically and in terms of the industry's future. And where it's heading, especially in light of the IEA report that was just released in May. What is the view within Chevron on the risks of stranded assets and carbon lock-in? And is it what then maybe potentially the view on the decarbonized fuels, on the repurposing of the existing infrastructure for such fuels? Because it is years further down the road, but it of course can't come anytime sooner. And maybe there is something you can share with us on that. Philosophically, where is Chevron going?
So that's an important question, and I think one that can be addressed by the way a company evaluates different projects. So a theme running through all of my comments is really to ensure the competitiveness of the production, both in terms of carbon efficiency as well as cost of production. Those two elements need to be paired together in an increasingly competitive future for oil and gas. So to ensure against or to protect against things like stranded asset considerations, or to think about how to have your production be part of the future, you want to remain as competitive as possible. At Chevron, we do this in a number of ways. One of the ways is we test our projects against multiple oil and gas prices in the future. We want to ensure that the projects in the company are resilient to a number of different scenarios. We talk about this in the report that I mentioned, testing against the IEA Sustainable Development Scenario and some initial insights into the net zero emission scenario, but really ensuring that the projects are competitive through different oil and gas prices is one of the easiest and main ways to test, because a number of the policy conversations, or the way it translates back, is through a commodity price change. So in addition, we include carbon pricing in our investment decisions, in our reserves calculations where appropriate, as kind of set out by the accounting rules, in our business plans, and in looking at the reduction opportunities for different areas. So we try and ensure that the future potential costs are incorporated, as well as the resilience against a number of different price scenarios. Lastly, I'll also mention the physical infrastructure, because I think the physical infrastructure and ensuring that the infrastructure is also resilient is an important part of the conversation. In addition to business continuity plans, we have climate risk assessed on the physical infrastructure design elements, and we've updated our design standards to look at the engineering requirements of potential different climate scenarios. And we've also started looking at partner and supply chain vulnerability. So this can apply both to potential impacts from climate change, as well as for other business continuity risks. So we view it as serving really all of the ideas that I've mentioned is really serving a number of different needs and helping ensure that the company and our assets, including those in Kazakhstan, are resilient against a number of different future potential risks.
Excellent. Thank you, Julie. And especially relevant in the Kazakh context in terms of the carbon border adjustment mechanism and future operations of exporters in the country. And so thank you for a comprehensive answer on that. Moving on to Nurlan, and on the subject of renewables, Nurlan, what do you think it would take to achieve now the 15% target by 2030? And do you think Kazakhstan could be doing more? Could it be higher? What is the number that you think is ambitious enough in the current global context? And also, what are the key challenges on the road to getting that? What are the bottlenecks and constraints?
Thank you, Aida. Well, as many say, and as many know, and that's being discussed, actually, I mentioned that several times during several decades, we have some problems related to flexible capacity or maneuver capacity. The renewables actually doesn't have any technical opportunity to develop and to evolve as long as we depend on Russian Federation in terms of the balancing capacity. So actually, we should have solved this problem yesterday, as it says, right? But as it goes, the saying goes. But the problem is really, really pressing. However, the only way out for Kazakhstan, and that's something that's been done, is to prepare a very detailed strategy for energy sector development. We have this equation with many unknown parameters. You mentioned 15%, right? But actually, a few days ago, the president has made another announcement, and from the 10% to 15% increase was declared just 2 days ago. There is another Paris agreement, right? By 50%, we need to reduce GHG by 50% by 2030. Another unknown parameter is the carbon neutrality. It's a new objective, new goal of the head of state to achieve 2060. And the fourth unknown parameter is the carbon tax, the European carbon tax, something that Kazakhstan will encounter in the future. On the other hand, as Mr. Yessimkhanov said, we have the social factor, societal factors. Kazakhstan has one of the cheapest electricity in the world. The kilowatt-an-hour price is the lowest, no matter what strategy we draft. And actually, we have to come up with the energy sector development strategy. We can no longer delay that. And no matter what strategy we have, it will eventually lead to increased tariffs. And in this very case, the reaction of the general public, the reaction of SMEs who are already suffering from the COVID-related implications. So these kind of social aspects, these kind of social implications need to be taken into account. And actually, I cannot underestimate enough that we are in a trap. We're trapped. Yes, we cannot go anywhere from baseline generation, and we cannot replace the coal-fired utilities. At the same time, the amortization and the fatigue or the depletion that we have requires replacement, and you agree. You remember, Aida, 5 to 7 years ago, actually, we were talking about this, that renewables, that yes, they should take over from the traditional, from the baseline generation. But how can we do that if we have this impediment, technical impedance for development of renewables? However, to solve this equation, we need to come up with a detailed strategy for energy sector development of the country. And it's not something that needs to be developed by the Ministry of Energy, but it needs to be developed by the government, all the ministries, all the Ministry of Finances funding the whole endeavor, Ministry of Social Protection and Welfare. The president actually said that if there will be some negative adverse impact for some categories of population, the president said he's ready to commit to support that. Ministry of Economy, what will be the investment expectations related to tariff increase, tariff growth? Same goes for green bonds or green funds. We've been talking about this subject for quite a while. We know the interest rate for IFIs, for long-term loans in tenge, so we know that, and we know that there are green bonds as well. So all of these issues are out there. And to solve, to give an answer, to find answer to the question, we need to come up with this strategy for energy sector development. The transfer, yes, we've heard lots of slogans and mottos even here. Some statements are being made. Of course, Mr. Yessimkhanov and Samruk are going to have their own objective, their goals and plans. I'm sure they will be doing that. They will be transferring CHPP to coal, but they're going to have the big coal mine with a 300 years of reserve of coal. What are they going to do with that? Also, Abay Kulanbay says, yes, that we do have this objective, the ambitious objective. How are we going to do that? How are we going to achieve that? I think the only way is to come up with a very thorough, very detailed strategy that is written together by local energy practitioners, by local specialists, by international specialists, maybe nuclear physics specialists, what actually Abay mentioned about the hydrogen. So only by doing that, we will be able to solve this equation. For the moment, we only have the unknown parameters.
Thank you, Nurlan. And I don't know if I'm encouraged or slightly sort of depressed by your outlook on the thing, but we are optimistic at the EBRD, and the signs of hope for us is, first of all, in the low level of subsidies required for renewables now in Kazakhstan, which you were part of this success as well. So the lower things are costing, the better chance they have of succeeding. And when we say it's cheap coal in the country, we of course do not factor in the carbon cost. We do not factor in local air pollution cost. Of course, we do not factor in, you know, the hospitalization rates or death rates in our cities. So this is, it's not, coal is not cheap. I mean, and this is something that, of course, will be difficult to address. It does require, completely agree, it does require a longer term strategy. But I also would like to say that it's great to see that so many stakeholders are converging in one idea of actually going forward to that 2060 target and throwing out things that, you know, hydrogen might sound futuristic at this point, but, you know, things are already, we know countries where green hydrogen is coming on commercial production now. And Kazakhstan can quickly catch up. So yes, coal is a big issue. It has to be addressed. And maybe you're absolutely right. One of the ways is to approach it through a longer term strategy of coal phase out, ensuring just transition for everybody, so nobody is left behind. Another thing is that it's not just Kazakhstan who is grappling with this issue. It's other countries, including in Europe, who have coal legacy and who are trying to sort out the way forward with that. As long as we're just moving in that direction, it's already a very positive sign. But in terms of renewables, I have one specific question, because you were part of this vector in the development of the country's sector. We see that the lower rates of prices achieved in Kazakhstan, but also in neighboring countries, show that investors really have to watch and be mindful of their returns. So what do you think? What do you think the expectations for developers in terms of getting their money back, but also getting some sort of return in the Kazakh context could be? Are we there yet? Could the prices be reduced further? Over to you.
Thank you for your question. I think we have reached one of the lowest prices for renewables that are attainable in Kazakhstan. Well, thanks to your efforts, thanks to the business community engaged in renewables, and thanks to the Ministry of Energy, we were able to introduce the transparent mechanism of auction trades, electronic trades, where the lowest bidder wins. But today, I think we have reached, not by the price, but actually when it comes to conditions, you know, including the connection to the grid, and considering the solar potential, the wind potential, I think we have reached the lowest price possible. However, we have delineate the investors. I mean, we kind of separate them. There are two types of investors. The one, depending on the interest of the investors, we believe that there will be more renewables objects and utilities concentrated in the hands of some large-scale companies. We used to have some individual investors who just wanted to invest, who wanted to get some ROIs or IRRs on their project, and actually who saw the investment as a way to make money. However, now we have the new investors such as Total or Shell or oil and gas giants who want to expand their green portfolio, green assets portfolio under the decarbonization policy. There's nothing wrong with that. Kazakhstan supports that, and we want to achieve our renewables indicators by any means available. But answering your question, we believe that the new renewables will now be concentrated in the hands of large-scale companies who, thanks to the economy of scales, will be able to come up with the low prices.
I think we are almost approaching our end of our session, and I would just, from my side, before I pass the floor to David, I would like to thank this distinguished panel and all of you for this fascinating discussion that we had today. And I'm sure it is to be continued. And thank you all for your contribution in decarbonizing Kazakhstan, not just by 2060, hopefully a bit earlier. Thank you.
Thank you.
May I add, Mr. Yessimkhanov would just like to add one caveat here. Well, one thing that I didn't mention. I fully agree with Nurlan that yes, we need to develop the sector, and I have no doubt that we need to develop the renewables. But as for the trajectories or the path, I'm sure that in the upcoming 50 years, we will see lots of technologies for, greener coal and for others. I think the renewables will go even cheaper, but they have one opinion, one thing, one discussion, one question. That's hydropower generation. We do have certain capacity. It's not high, but it's sufficient when it comes to regulation, to balancing of flexible capacity. But actually, we moved to the auctions. We are so happy with the solar and wind power auctions. But then when it comes to hydro, unfortunately, the low tariffs were not very impactful for hydropower generation. Well, Abay, you are the head of the Renewables department of the ministry, and auctions for hydro prevented the hydro from development. And we're now discussing, what if large-scale hydropower plants go back to fixed tariffs? What happens then? I think your opinion as international institutions will be very, very important here. We're discussing it. It's just sort of a segue for the future, after all these comments. Yes, Nurlan, of course, may say that, of course, wind and solar is auctioned, but what are you going to do without the auctions? But I think hydropower will be very instrumental for renewables. We see that some of the hydro projects sort of mismatch, do not conform to the price range of the renewables, and we need to develop an understanding to that end. We're actually negotiating with the ministry. We're looking at the benchmarking of other countries. We'll see what will be the outcomes. Yeah, thank you. I'm sure we'll be discussing it further. Thank you. Just had to say it.
Very good indeed. And at this point, I'd like to just emphasize that Aida's comments. I mean, this has been a brilliant discussion, particularly about the overall direction, but also the complexity of the issues that everyone is dealing with. So I'd like to thank Aida particularly as moderator, and all of the panel from the British-Kazakh Society. Most appreciated, and also the two people that we don't see here, Alijan pulling the strings in the background, and Gaini interpreting in Almaty. So finally, just to mention a few aspects relative to the British-Kazakh Society. We have quite a number of events on the boil here. Tomorrow at 11 o'clock, June the 9th, there's a webinar titled Army of the Great Step, Kazakhstan's Military Reforms and Peacekeeping Aims, which should be very, very interesting. June the 24th, we have a webinar on strategic trade issues with Vice Minister Asıl Janasova and the DIT Director of Trade Policy, Greg Hans. July the 8th, Minerals for the Green Economy. September the 21st, oil and gas renewables focused on the Caspian, and an ongoing program related to 30 years of independence during the year. So with that, I encourage you to look at our website, but also please remember the Society is a non-for-profit organization and is dependent on your support as members and sponsors. Thank you all. Keep safe. Bye now.